The UEN scout ship Ulysses glided silently through the void, its sleek hull reflecting the faint light of distant stars. Within the confines of the vessel, a crew of intrepid explorers and scientists worked tirelessly to unravel the mysteries of the cosmos. At the heart of the ship's security operations was Grant, a seasoned veteran with a keen eye and an unwavering commitment to the safety of his crewmates. He stood on the bridge, his gaze fixed on the viewscreen as the Ulysses approached its latest destination, a lush, boggy swamp planet known only as XK-317. Preparing for orbital insertion, the helmsman announced, his fingers dancing across the control panel. All systems nominal. Grant nodded, his eyes never leaving the screen. He had overseen countless missions like this one, but he knew better than to let his guard down. In the depths of space, danger lurked around every corner. As the Ulysses settled into orbit, a small exploration team prepared to descend to the planet's surface. Led by the intrepid biologist Dr. Lena Sorensen, the team was eager to collect samples and gather data on the planet's unique ecosystem. Grant watched as the team boarded the shuttle, their excited chatter filling the comms. He couldn't help but feel a twinge of envy. The thrill of exploration, of setting foot on an alien world, was something he had always dreamed of. But his duty was to the ship and its crew, and he knew that his place was here, ensuring their safety. The shuttle departed the Ulysses hangar bay, its engines flaring as it descended towards the swamp planet's atmosphere. Grant monitored its progress on the viewscreen, his eyes tracking the shuttle's every move. "Shuttle is away," the helmsman reported. "Estimated time to landing 15 minutes. Grant nodded, his jaw clenched. The next few hours would be critical. The team would need to work quickly and efficiently to gather their samples and return to the ship before nightfall. The swamp planet's atmosphere was thick and hazy, and visibility would be limited once the sun went down. As the minutes ticked by, Grant paced the bridge, his mind racing with potential scenarios. He had run countless drills and simulations, preparing his team for every possible contingency. But he knew that no amount of training could fully prepare them for the unknown. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the comms crackled to life. "Shuttle to Ulysses, Doctor." Sorensen's voice rang out, tinged with excitement. "We've landed safely and are preparing to disembark. Stand by for updates." Grant let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The first hurdle had been cleared. Now it was up to the team to complete their mission and return safely. As the hours passed, the exploration team sent back regular updates, their reports filled with wonder and excitement at the strange new world they had discovered. Grant listened intently, his mind cataloging every detail, every potential threat. And then, just as the sun began to set over the swamp planet's horizon, the shuttle returned, its engines roaring as it docked with the Ulysses. The exploration team disembarked, their faces flushed with exertion and their sample cases filled to the brim. Grant greeted them in the hangar bay, his eyes scanning each team member for signs of injury or distress. But they all seemed to be in good spirits, chattering excitedly about their discoveries as they underwent standard decontamination procedures. As the team dispersed to their quarters, Grant couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. He had learned long ago to trust his instincts, and right now they were screaming at him that danger lurked just around the corner. But for now, all he could do was remain vigilant and prepare for whatever lay ahead. The Ulysses had a long journey ahead of it, and Grant knew that he would need to be ready for anything. Little did he know that the real danger was already on board, lurking in the shadows and waiting to strike. The swamp planet had harbored a secret, and now that secret was loose on the ship, ready to unleash hell upon the unsuspecting crew. The Ulysses hummed with activity as the crew settled back into their daily routines. The exploration team had returned safely, and their samples were being analyzed by the ship's scientists. Grant kept a watchful eye on the proceedings, his instincts still on high alert. Days passed without incident, and the crew began to relax. The excitement of the swamp planet discovery had given way to a sense of normalcy, and life on the ship returned to its usual rhythm. But then, the first signs of trouble began to emerge. It started with Dr. Sorensen. She had been working tirelessly in the lab, analyzing the samples she had collected on the planet's surface. But one morning she failed to report for her shift. Grant was immediately on edge. He dispatched a security team to check on the doctor, his heart pounding with a sense of foreboding. When they arrived at her quarters, they found Dr. Sorensen collapsed on the floor, her skin pale and clammy. She was rushed to the medical bay, where the ship's doctor, Marcus Reeves, began to run tests. But before he could complete his analysis, another member of the exploration team fell ill, and then another. Within hours, the medical bay was filled with sick crew members, all exhibiting the same strange symptoms: fever, delirium, and an uncharacteristic aggression. Grant worked tirelessly with Dr. Reeves to contain the outbreak, quarantining the affected crew members and implementing strict decontamination protocols. But despite their best efforts, the sickness continued to spread. Tensions on the ship began to rise as fear of the unknown contagion took hold. Crew members eyed each other with suspicion, wondering who would be the next to fall ill. Grant struggled to maintain order, his mind racing with possibilities. Could the sickness be a result of something they had encountered on the swamp planet? Or was it something more sinister, a deliberate attack on the ship and its crew? As the days passed, the situation grew more and more dire. The sick crew members were not responding to treatment, and their conditions were deteriorating rapidly. Dr. Reeves worked around the clock, desperate to find a cure. But every lead he pursued seemed to dead end, leaving him frustrated and exhausted. Grant, meanwhile, focused on keeping the ship running smoothly. He knew that if they could just hold out long enough, they could make it back to Earth, where the sick crew members could receive proper medical attention. But as the sickness continued to spread, he began to wonder if they would even make it that far. Late one night, as Grant pored over security logs in his quarters, a sudden scream pierced the air. He was on his feet in an instant, his hand reaching for his sidearm. He raced through the ship's corridors, his heart pounding in his chest. When he arrived at the medical bay, he found a scene of unimaginable horror. The sick crew members were no longer in their beds. Instead, they were shambling through the room, their eyes glazed and their mouths twisted into grotesque snarls. And they were attacking the medical staff, tearing at them with a ferocity that was both terrifying and inhuman. Grant watched in horror as one of the infected crew members sank its teeth into Dr. Reeves' neck, tearing out a chunk of flesh. He raised his weapon, his finger trembling on the trigger. He had sworn an oath to protect the crew, but this was something he had never trained for. As the infected crew members turned their attention towards him, Grant knew that he had no choice. He had to act fast, or the entire ship would be lost. With a heavy heart, he took aim and fired, the sound of gunshots echoing through the medical bay. And as the infected crew members fell, one by one, Grant couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a nightmare from which there would be no waking up. The gunshots echoed through the corridors of the Ulysses, a grim reminder of the horror that had unfolded in the medical bay. Grant stood over the fallen bodies of his crewmates, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had been forced to do. But there was no time to dwell on the past. The infected crew members were dead, but the danger was far from over. Grant knew that he had to act fast. He ordered the ship's security team to seal off the medical bay, quarantining the area to prevent any further spread of the contagion. But even as they worked to contain the outbreak, reports began to flood in from across the ship. Crew members were falling ill left and right, their symptoms mirroring those of the infected in the medical bay. And then, the unthinkable happened. The infected crew members began to rise from the dead, their bodies reanimated by some unknown force. They shambled through the ship's corridors, their eyes glazed and their mouths twisted into grotesque snarls. Grant watched in horror as they attacked their fellow crew members, tearing at them with a ferocity that was both terrifying and inhuman. He knew that he had to act fast. He rallied the ship's security team, arming them with whatever weapons they could find. They set up barricades throughout the ship, determined to hold the line against the zombie horde. But the infected were relentless. They seemed to possess a strength and speed that was far beyond that of any human, and they would not stop until every last member of the crew was either dead or infected. Grant led his team through the ship's corridors, his heart pounding in his chest as they fought to contain the outbreak. They battled the zombies at every turn, the sound of gunfire and screams echoing through the halls. But even as they fought, Grant couldn't shake the feeling that they were fighting a losing battle. The infected seemed to multiply with every passing minute, and their numbers were quickly overwhelming the ship's defenses. He watched in horror as members of his own team fell to the zombie horde, their screams cut short as they were torn apart by the infected. But Grant refused to give up. He knew that if they could just hold out long enough, they might be able to find a way to stop the contagion and save what was left of the crew. He led his team to the ship's engine room, where they made their final stand. They barricaded the doors and armed themselves with whatever weapons they could find, determined to fight to the last man. The zombies came at them in waves, their grotesque forms illuminated by the flashing emergency lights. Grant and his team fought with everything they had, their weapons tearing through the infected with a savage ferocity. But even as they fought, Grant knew that it was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed. The zombies seemed to possess an endless stamina, and their numbers were simply too great. Just as all hope seemed lost, however, a sudden explosion rocked the ship. Grant watched in amazement as a wall of flame tore through the engine room, engulfing the zombie horde in a fiery inferno. He turned to see Dr. Reeves standing behind him, a grim smile on his face. The doctor had rigged the ship's engines to explode, sacrificing himself to give the others a chance to escape. Grant and his team fought their way to the escape pods, the ship shuddering and groaning around them as the engines tore themselves apart. They made it to the pods just as the ship began to break apart, the zombie horde hot on their heels. Grant slammed the door shut behind them, his heart pounding in his chest as they jettisoned away from the doomed vessel. As they watched the Ulysses explode in a brilliant flash of light, Grant couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over him. They had survived the nightmare, but at what cost? The zombie virus was still out there, waiting to strike again, and Grant knew that it was only a matter of time before it found its way back to Earth. They had to find a way to stop it before it was too late. The fate of humanity itself hung in the balance, and Grant knew that he would stop at nothing to see this mission through to the end. The escape pods drifted through the silent void of space, the remnants of the Ulysses scattered in a debris field behind them. Inside the cramped confines of the pods, Grant and the surviving members of the crew struggled to come to terms with the horror they had just endured. They had escaped the nightmare of the zombie outbreak, but the scars it had left behind would last a lifetime. Grant looked around at the haggard faces of his crewmates, seeing the same haunted look in their eyes that he knew must be mirrored in his own. But there was no time to dwell on the past. They had to focus on the future, on containing the zombie virus and preventing it from spreading any further. As the escape pods docked with the nearest UEN outpost, Grant and his team were immediately placed under quarantine. They underwent a battery of tests and decontamination procedures, as teams of scientists and medical experts worked to study the zombie virus and develop a cure. But even as they worked tirelessly to contain the outbreak, whispers began to circulate throughout the outpost. Rumors of the horrors that had unfolded on the Ulysses, of the unstoppable zombie horde that had consumed the ship and its crew. Grant knew that they had to act fast to prevent panic from spreading. He worked closely with the outpost security team to lock down the facility, restricting access to only essential personnel. At the same time, he and his team pored over the data they had collected from the Ulysses, searching for any clues that might help them understand the nature of the zombie virus and how to stop it. They discovered that the virus had likely originated on the swamp planet, possibly from some unknown microorganism that had infected the crew during their exploration mission. The virus had then mutated and spread rapidly throughout the ship, turning its victims into the mindless, savage creatures they had fought against. But even armed with this knowledge, they were no closer to finding a cure. The virus was unlike anything they had ever seen before, and it seemed to defy all conventional methods of treatment. As the days turned into weeks, tensions began to rise within the outpost. The survivors of the Ulysses were growing restless, eager to return to their families and loved ones back on Earth. But Grant knew that they couldn't take that risk. If even a single infected individual made it back to Earth, the consequences would be catastrophic. the zombie virus would spread like wildfire, consuming everything in its path. And so he made the difficult decision to keep the survivors in quarantine indefinitely. It was a heavy burden to bear, but one that he knew he had to shoulder for the greater good. As the weeks turned into months, the scientists and medical experts at the outpost made slow but steady progress in their quest to develop a cure. They worked around the clock, driven by a sense of urgency and purpose that Grant had never seen before. And then, finally, a breakthrough. A team of researchers had managed to isolate a key component of the virus, one that they believed could be used to develop a vaccine. The news spread like wildfire throughout the outpost, and for the first time in months, Grant allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. If they could just hold out a little longer, they might be able to put an end to this nightmare once and for all. But even as they celebrated this small victory, Grant knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. The swamp planet had been placed under strict quarantine, its coordinates blacklisted from all UEN databases. But he knew that there would always be those who would seek to exploit the power of the zombie virus, to use it as a weapon of war and terror. They had to be vigilant, always on guard against those who would seek to unleash this horror upon the universe once again. As Grant looked out at the stars, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and wonder at the vastness of the universe that lay before them. They had come so close to the brink of destruction, but they had survived. And now, they had a chance to build a better future, one free from the threat of the zombie virus and the horrors it had unleashed. It would be a long and difficult journey, but one that Grant knew he was ready to embark upon. For the sake of his crew, for the sake of all humanity, he would stop at nothing to see this mission through to the end. And so, as the outpost bustled with activity and purpose, Grant turned his gaze to the horizon, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The nightmare of the swamp planet may have been behind them, but the fight against the zombie virus was far from over. And he would be there every step of the way, ready to lead the charge and protect the innocent from the horrors that lurked in the shadows. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to subscribe and leave a like. I'll see you in our next video.